Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. The mission of Dealing with Goliath is to sharpen the psychological edge in business leaders with skin in the game who want to be more effective under pressure, uncover hidden value, and increase profitability. With guest experts from across the business spectrum, we deliver gems of wisdom delving into their methods, their thinking, and approach to business life and problem solving. This is the Grande Cup of Insight, long-form podcast interview where we take a little bit more time to delve a bit deeper into our guests' experience, stories, and get those priceless nuggets for you. I'm your host, Al McBride. Today, my guest is Joe Jacobi. I was going to say Jacobi, that's the way we'd say it in Ireland, but Joe Jacobi. Joe was a member of the US Canoe team at the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, competing in the C2 slalom event. He and his partner captured the gold medal, the first American in Olympic history to capture a gold medal in whitewater slalom. In 2000, Joe was named Paddler of the Century by Paddler magazine. In 2010, he became the Chief Executive Officer for USA Canoe Kayak, the national governing body for Olympic-level paddle sports in the United States. Joe served as an analyst for NBC Sports coverage at Canoeing at the 2008 Summer Olympics. He is a performance coach, collaborating with leaders and teams to create and perform simple and clear plans that move them from outside the noisy day-to-day rush of life and bring focus to what truly matters. Senior executives from Fortune 50 companies to business owners to world-class athletes seek his help to improve performance and unleash their hidden talents and attributes. His mantra is simple, slower, and less. So let's dive in.
We're always like working and hustling and I think that there's something there's something more to it that, your ability to perform, to come up with good ideas, to be creative, to make connections, that's all based on the sense of doing, but your capacity to do is very directly connected to your ability to be and to rest and to replenish energy, not expend it. And I think that was something that Alistair kind of intuitively understands, and I really enjoyed that part of our conversation.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. It's also something that's becoming more and more popular now, isn't it? With mindful awareness and taking time out being as important. Nearly that, as you said, that rest and recuperation time is the key area. I think even particularly with sport, is sleep science and rest is sort of now that third area with fitness and nutrition, right?
100%. I came across a really good book. Unfortunately, I didn't read the book until just after I retired from my athletic career, but it was very influential on my coaching. And it was written by Jim Loehr and Tony Schwartz, The Power of Full Engagement. Right. And honestly, so Loehr was a sports psychologist, and he took a lot of techniques and elements of high performance sport and related it to what they called the corporate athlete. And so it really was about a book of transfer, but I was just reading it as like, oh, I would have really liked to have thought about sport this way. Like, for example, they would talk, Schwartz and Loehr would talk about things like, don't think about your work as a marathon. Think about it as like a series of short sprints. Right. And like that. And so one of the really big things that they focused on was rest and recovery. And that really kind of came out in so many different ways. And I think that now it is becoming a lot more mainstream and a lot easier to talk about. Although I still worry that we're a lot better at talking about it than we are actually about doing it. And so rest can be in the form of sleep, but I think it can also come in other kinds of breaks and other kinds of mindsets that we use throughout the workday. So it can come in this world of Zoom calls, if you have any sense of control over your Zoom calls and your meetings, one of my questions is, if you're doing a 30-minute call, can it be 25? If you're doing a 60-minute call, can it be 50 minutes?
Right.
And just start to think about putting buffers in between these moments in which you're kind of designed to be on, as, letting the moments that are designed to be on just sort of run over and on top of each other. And then once you have that buffer of 5 minutes per 30 minutes or 10 or 15 per hour, you can do certain things with those that can make a dramatically big difference in how you feel at the end of the day, especially when you practice them over time, whether it's something really small, like 1 minute of mindful breathing, whether if you have 10 minutes and you can get outside and maybe get a couple of breaths of fresh air, or maybe do some jumping jacks, or take a real lunch break, and even if you don't eat lunch, maybe you do exercise on your lunch break. And then also then we can get into sleep as well. But these you address these things over time in little steps consistently over time. They completely change your disposition to perform in those moments when you want to be on.
And that's a really interesting point that you make, because I think a lot of people somewhat intrinsically want to have an on and off switch. But how, because this, I remember in reports of which executives were grossly more productive than, not just marginally, but significantly more productive than a lot of their colleagues, i.e. the average, which was still pretty good, versus the top performers. And there were a number of different factors, but I remember one of them was they're much more 0 or 1. And this was the same with, elite soldiers, and the same often with elite athletes. They could move from this fully on, fully present, fully giving 100%, and not just giving 100%, but an actual 100%, to then being off and done and clear. So this is sort of the question for you. So a lot of people want that, but how do you know you're off? Because often I see clients of mine where, they'll be on and doing stuff, and then, I'm taking a break. Or what did you do on your break? I was just answering emails or on Facebook or something like this.
I love this. Yeah.
It's the cognitive switch that you need. Am I right? Or what definition would you give your clients to make sure they know that they're off? Is there a little acid test? Or
I love the spirit of your question, because I'm thinking about two things that are kind of embedded in your question. First of all, is like the muscle memory it takes to schedule the break. Like if you're doing that, like we're getting somewhere. Like that's not a bad thing. And then secondly, we'll get into the kind of things of getting better at what you do once you have, your break, whether it's just a little bit of time or you have more time, because you're right. Taking your email outside for 10 minutes and answering emails, like that's not exactly a break, but I will say it is better than, being at your desk.
Okay. So it is a sliding scale. It's not
I think so. I think everything is a practice. If getting faster at whitewater canoeing is a practice, I think getting better at sleeping is a practice. Getting better at resting is a practice. And so one of the first things that I'm always looking for with clients is like, what's the easiest way to kind of exercise that muscle that you're going to use, that muscle you want to use in a bigger, more dramatic way in those higher pressure circumstances, but how can we kind of exercise those muscles in a much smaller way in a less consequential circumstance? So I'll just give you an example, and we can also apply this to taking rest too. A lot of times I'll talk to clients about, taking a little bit of time in their work schedule for doing deep work, deep thought, deep reflection, where they kind of tune out alerts, emails, the ability to be
Deep work with Cal Newport right here.
Absolutely love Cal's work, and digital minimalism is such an important. We can dig into that as well. Another great Cal Newport book.
Sorry, I interrupted there, but yeah, you get into it.
Yeah, and I said, look, even if it's only for 5 minutes, a couple of days a week, or 15 minutes, a couple of days a week, to really block that time out on the calendar. It's like you're sending some messages to yourself and to others. You're putting boundaries around space. That's really important. And, I think when we kind of look at leaders that we admire who aren't just being more productive or being more efficient, but actually seem to be really happy and living a rich life and living a good life, they often have these elements of deep work, deep thought, deep reflection in their lives. So I say, okay, let's exercise the muscle to kind of set the boundaries and put this on the calendar. So then the really hard part begins, when we open up our journal and we get blank pages, and we have a blank page staring us in the face, or a blinking cursor on our whatever the app is that we like to write on, where we can just be kind of free and unstructured in our writing. And I always tell clients, we can get better at that part, but the first thing is to exercise that muscle of blocking out the space. And, you send the signal to yourself, you send the signal to others that this is important. This really matters. I think we can do this with deep work, deep thought, deep reflection. I think we can do it with rest. I think we can do it with sleep. And I can tell you, and I'm not here just preaching a message, you are talking to someone that when I was the chief executive officer of USA Canoe Kayak, the national governing body for competitive canoeing in the United States under the umbrella of the US Olympic Committee, my first 3 years of working in that job, which was I ended up doing it for 5 years, my nights were an absolute disaster. Like everything from the time I walked into my apartment in Oklahoma City at night to the time I woke up, it was like a manual for what not to do, from what I ate to what I drank. Basically what would happen is that running like a big, large membership nonprofit organization, the night was like the start of a second work day, because everyone else who was working, their regular jobs, the participants of canoeing in the United States, well, the nighttime was their time to get all their canoeing work done. Volunteer committees and board calls and things like that, and check, the emails. And so my nights, I had my laptop open, I had a phone open, a tablet open, I had a pot of coffee going, I had the TV on. And not only did I not especially enjoy many of the people with whom I was doing the work, but I was exhausted, and I was just setting everything up in if you think I was setting up a good night's sleep, it was the exact opposite. And then I'd fall asleep with all this technology on my bed. I'd wake up, put the technology away, but then I'd, be up stirring for an hour and how we're going to keep the lights on in our organization. And then I, finally out of exhaustion, I would fall asleep again. And then I would wake up at, 7 a.m. and start checking the phone again. And it was just a recipe for disaster. And so I'm actually talking to you and to the people who are listening to us from a real point of experience. It was really, really ugly and honestly pretty embarrassing at times, how bad my nights looked, everything from going to sleep, the sleep itself, and then waking up. And today, not surprisingly, I'm on the extreme other side of it. I have a lot of time in the morning available to be very mindful and to to be very self-investing, to kind of keep voices out of my life for the first few hours of the day. I live in the Pyrenees Mountains, here in Catalonia, and I have exercise, I have meditation, I have creative time. I have all these things, but I wouldn't be having this conversation with you if I didn't think that just waking up and taking the first 5 minutes of your day to just tune into your own voice. If I wouldn't be here today if I didn't think that in itself, repeated day after day, could make a really, really big difference for people, as opposed to waking up with your phone, waking up, turning on the TV, waking up and kind of putting the needs of others, and the desires of others ahead of your own.
Exactly. There's so many things to circle back to there, Joe. It's quite remarkable. One of the things is exactly that when you're even setting aside, as you said, probably at the start of there with clients, if you're even setting aside 15 minutes, that's 15 minutes of an action where you've scheduled it. You're making it habit, which is interesting, but it's also you're involving agency, choice, and action.
Yes.
Versus, as you said, the opposite, which all the more insightful that you actually live that horror show and unpleasantness as a way of being for a good while of this reaction and overwhelm, because these things will never stop coming in. I mean, that's the thing with LinkedIn and Facebook and you name it, email. It's just constantly on, and it will constantly demand your attention if you let it. And for me, that's kind of the underlying principle of both deep work and the digital minimalism, and that whole movement that Cal Newport's a part of is, where is the agency? Who's controlling who here? Yeah. And it comes back to that thing of, once you have choice, you have control. Once you have control, you have choice. And even just realizing that one moment of choice that you have, you're taking back some of that control, and you're less out of control, less overwhelmed, less in reaction, less all of those things. But fascinating stuff. It's very interesting. When was there a gradual process of retaking back that control for you, or was it a big move and a big change?
Yeah, again, and I think this is, I'm like my own best control group, I mean, I feel like my life is sort of like I've had these two extremes. So, and by the way, I mean, I didn't just, quit my job at the low point, with USA Canoe Kayak. I stayed with it. I wanted to figure this stuff out, not doing better in my work. I wanted to figure me out and start to do better work with USA Canoe Kayak, which I did. And then I left, which we can get into in a moment. But it was very small. But let me tell you the story that I kind of kept telling myself, as I was, ultimately, as I was making a lot of bad choices, I was putting on a lot of weight. I was irritable. I was feeling a lot of stress. I was just taking care of everyone else and never taking care of myself. And the story I would tell myself is be like, Joe, you've won the Olympic Games. You figure this out. Like, you've done harder things. And I just, then the other side, and then on the other, that was one voice on one shoulder. Then on the other shoulder, it was like, yeah, so why aren't you? Why aren't you starting? And so one thing that just happened, it was just, I feel so lucky. I was, when I was the chief executive officer of USA Canoe Kayak, we moved the headquarters of the national governing body from Charlotte, North Carolina to Oklahoma City, where Oklahoma City was investing hundreds of millions of dollars in their downtown riverfront. I know you would never think of like the middle of the United States as this hub for canoe, kayak, and rowing, but it's an unbelievable facility. And so we were located in the Oklahoma City Boathouse district, and we were surrounded by a lot of employees that were kind of building this kind of urban outdoor mecca, not just for elite athletes, but for regular people, and to get healthy. And so in January of 2012, we did an employee wellness program where we would work out during lunchtime in one of the boathouses, in one of the weight rooms of the one of the boathouses where the elite athletes trained. And it was perfect. I went into it not with a goal to lose weight. I was just looking for a pattern interrupt. The pattern interrupt of not going to the all-you-can-eat Chinese food buffet or the all-you-can-eat pizza buffet. But I'm just going to go show up at these lunchtime workouts and play sports and do exercise with my friends. And, working out at lunchtime is actually a great time to work out, but it has its drawbacks too, because, you if you get all sweaty and then you got to take a shower and, get all like cleaned up for a second time in the day. And I just sort of was looking at other people I was working out with that were taking more time to do that. I'm like, well, I'm going to do this too. And so it was really I was doing it out of enjoyment. And so when I started to move my body a little bit, and it wasn't like I was losing weight or very quickly or making a lot of progress, but this is when I started to think about waking up. And I'm like, if I just wake up 5 minutes earlier in the day or with the first 5 minutes, instead of turning on the TV, what if I just write in my journal, and I answer 3 questions in my journal and I drink a glass of water, and then I'll go and start doing my day as I used to do it, pretty much, because, I still have an important job. And that's what I did. I journaled and I drank a glass of water. And then as I started to do that, and this was kind of also mixing with the lunchtime workout, not in weeks, but over months, I did start to feel better and lose some weight. My energy was better. And then you start asking, what else could I do? What would, instead of waking up 5 minutes earlier, what would 10 minutes earlier or 15 minutes, what could I do with that time in the morning? So that's a long way of answering your question. It was very slow. And I think to that point, I'll sort of kind of finish up on this, Al, is that I use 2 mantras a lot. One is small steps forward every day. Everything just seemed to happen in small steps forward. There were no big jumps. Even my decision to eventually move here to Spain, which was a function of going to the gym and doing these lunchtime workouts, it started with that. And then it was like what looked like a big quality of life move was really just like the next logical small step. And secondly, one thing that I observe about my neighbors here in La Seu d'Urgell, these Catalans who live in the Pyrenees, I use 3 words to describe their way of life, and that is simple, slower, and less.
I was going to ask you about that. I very much got the feeling that was a mantra of yours. And I wonder, could you just dive into that? So you move from the States where, I don't want to generalize, but generally
Please,
it's like,
if you don't, I will.
Bigger is better, go big or go home, all this sort of stuff.
That's right.
Right. And high ambition is very much a trait that's held in high regard. And you moved to 2 hours outside Barcelona. So Barcelona is a pretty active place itself.
It is.
Been there many times. It's pretty lively.
Yeah, it is.
But and it's an economic powerhouse of Spain. But you're not even there. You're 2 hours toward the mountains. So what that, and as you said, it's very interesting that you said that it felt just like the next logical, natural step.
Yeah.
So what brought you to that point that was so natural, rather than just this huge cognitive leap that, oh my God, I have this total culture change? And why was it so easy?
Well,
simple, not easy.
Yeah, right. And I mean, and there's a really big difference between simple and easy too. Yeah. I think that it is that's a tough one. Well, first of all, let me kind of say something about simple, slower, and less. I think it really is in the DNA of the people with whom I live around here with. Even if you look at the best mountain trail runner in the world, one of the best endurance athletes in the world, Kilian Jornet, he's from this part of the world. He went to school here in La Seu. He was raised right around the bend you can see off my balcony in the Pyrenees, and he's 33 now, and he's just an amazing athlete. But if you listen to his podcasts or listen to him talk and his relationship with nature, I think even for people who have these ambitions that we associate with the United States of being more efficient, being more productive, doing more, being faster, I would say that if you look at the people with whom I live around here in Catalonia, I believe that simple, slower, and less it's not necessarily a way for other people to live, but it is a great mindset and a great lens by which to look at what you're doing. Even if your goal is to double sales or to 10x something or to do twice as much in half the time, whatever those kind of goals are, that I would say that these are really important words to pay attention to. And here's why. Literally, as I look over the top of my computer screen at you, I'm watching the best whitewater canoeing athletes in Spain come down the 1992 Olympic whitewater canoeing channel. And paddling whitewater rivers is this moving, changing medium that is unpredictable. And, even athletes we have athletes that I can see outside my window right now that are hoping to stand on the Olympic podium at the next year in Tokyo at the Olympic Games. And to do that, you would think, okay, well, if you want to be the best at whitewater canoeing, you just got to train in whitewater all the time, like these big, powerful rapids. And that would actually be incorrect. Our athletes all over the world that win Olympic medals, they spend a lot of time in flat water where they can really control their technique. They don't have to worry about getting their boats knocked over by a wave. They can really experiment with the body-boat relationship with balance and how the boat sits on the water. They can perfect technique and efficiency. They can do a lot more repetition because, the water is smaller. It's not like going into a gym and maxing out lifting heavy weights, but these are like paddling flat water is like doing light weights, high reps. This is simple, slower, and less. We're finding a way to simplify a very complicated medium. Instead of going fast, we're learning perfect technique going really, really slowly. And by, in the world of less, we're just taking away rocks and we're taking away features. And what we're doing is that we're focusing on the things that we can control and really get that right in flat water, then take that package and bring it back out into the unpredictability of whitewater. Then go out and practice those moves that way. But if all you do is practice in whitewater, it's like you're going to be much slower in evolving your technique and your efficiency and really feeling the water, because you're always kind of looking at this rock that might hurt you or this hydraulic that might hurt you. Right. And so it's very easy for me to talk with sales leaders who have very aggressive goals. I have a lot of clients at companies like HubSpot and Salesforce that have very aggressive sales goals. And yet we have conversations about simple, slower, and less as a lens of looking at what they're doing. If technique is going to be a part of producing goals, why wouldn't you slow down and perfect your technique and be more efficient with your technique so that you have a better chance of repeating it more efficiently over time?
Would it be accurate to say that a lot of this is to not just practice, but to hone closer and closer to perfection, the fundamentals? So that, as you said, on flat water, every millimeter of difference you can probably learn to feel that you just couldn't get a feel for when you're being bashed around and you're having to react to all this other stuff coming at you.
1,000%.
Whereas on flat, you get that fine tuning so that when you go back in the water, as I said, you have this built up familiarity that otherwise you wouldn't really be able to. Well, you would, but it would just take an awful lot longer. So I'm just intrigued then as to how you parallel that into those clients with, say, highly aggressive or ambitious sales targets. What's the fundamentals equivalent for them? Is it the few things they need to do? Is it just concentrating on one or two things? What is it?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things, and one of the things that you quickly see about sales today is that all the people seem to have a lot of dashboards on their screen that's kind of letting them know information in real time. And like we've been kind of trained to believe like this gamification of what we're doing is like always helpful. And I should tell you, for the time, occasionally I go out to the river and I still coach canoeing athletes a little bit. My coaching practice has picked up a lot. I don't have as much time at the wall as I used to, but when I go to the water, I don't bring a stopwatch, even though I'm working with athletes that, ultimately want to win Olympic medals that will be separated by hundreds of seconds. I don't bring a watch. Number one, I know that they're going to get their time. They're going to time their sessions somewhere else with another coach, or they're going to do race. They're going to get that. They're going to get that feedback of metrics somewhere else.
Okay, so you're not doing the metrics. So what are you bringing?
So what I want to do is that I want them to paddle down a section of the course, and without any of us knowing whether they actually went faster or slower, I just want to ask the question: what did you notice when you couldn't notice times, when you couldn't notice the clock? And so the equivalent of that with the salespeople, and I always ask the sales leaders this, if we just turned off the dashboard, what would you do differently? If you couldn't see targets and goals and real-time things, what would you do differently? They were like, I'd probably call some clients and just check in and see how they're doing. Great. It's like relationship building. How wonderful. Let's do more of that. Another thing could be when a salesperson points out maybe there's a point in their call or their presentation or maybe collaborating with someone where they're really struggling. And I think it can be very, pragmatic. The pragmatic solution would be let's look at the problem, where things are going wrong, and let's fix that. And what I do, very similar as what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about deep work and deep reflection, is I'm always looking for smaller and less consequential ways to use the same muscles that they're going to use in those situations when the pressure is really on, but find ways to practice them in ways that are less consequential. One of my favorite things to do is I have a sense that many people go to a coffee shop to buy coffee. Well, how can we sort of turn that into the way you interact with the barista, whether that, no matter what that is, maybe you generally are not going to get very uptight or nervous about this one transactional exchange with a barista over the coffee, but you could use that as a way to practice. That to me is the equivalent of practicing flat water. When you can find a way to practice to use the muscle that you're going to use, say having a difficult conversation. Yesterday I was with a client where we talked about, I'll give you another example. Was talking with one of our doctor clients about the challenges in collaborating with a very competitive teammate. And one of the questions I asked is okay, you might have these points that you want to make to your colleague, but what if you framed all the points you want to make as questions to your person, so that it was they could answer the question as they were coming up with the idea that you want to get answered. And I said, but even better yet, instead of practicing that on your colleague where you really want to see the difference, practice it on your kids. Because
more challenging. Look, this is incredible, Joe. This is exactly what I do with my clients in terms of negotiation, or as you say, difficult conversations. Is you're not going to use it. At least you're not going to use it well in high stakes if you haven't practiced in low stakes, or as you say, nearly no stakes. And it's because you get to play. This is something that you mentioned a few times, that when you play sport, and it's not, people mix up this difference between gamification and gainful mindset. A gainful mindset is when you're playing soccer or chess or anything where there are some boundaries. Maybe you're collaborating, maybe you're competing, maybe it's golf where you're just competing with yourself. But there's this challenge, there's this idea of failure is not really failure, you're just learning and you're going again. All these, you're able to pick yourself up from setbacks much easier. If you think of computer games, you play it thousands of times to get through a round, right? Or gamers do. So why can you fail at one thing 10,000 times in that scenario, but twice in real life, and then you're like, oh, I give up? Yeah, you'll go 10,001 times in the computer game. It's
I
the
love
gameful
that.
mindset. Whereas, as you said, people mix that up with gamification, which is the other way. It's what would you say? It's less intrinsic. It's like, oh, we're gonna make sure you're hitting all these dopamine addiction points of things flashing, and it's not as intrinsically valuable to the person. So it's just so many interesting points there. So how do you feel that difference with, as I said, playing that game, almost bringing fun, joy, curiosity back to it? And you mentioned that with, as you said, when people aren't thinking of the time, what do they notice? So that sort of was just, instead of bringing that awareness back into it. I wonder, could you talk about some of those themes a little bit more for us?
You know, you're talking as someone I've taken up running at this
Hmm.
stage of my life. I mean, I have been for about 11 or 12 years now, and you know, I, I really feel like a lot of what I do tends to be a little bit of extreme, so that I can learn these things and figure out ways to present them in ways that aren't very extreme. So I run 5 or 6 days a week,
Okay.
and I run marathons. I've qualified for Boston. You know, I've run. You know, I seem to be at 51 years old. I'm feeling good. I don't expect that to happen forever, but I'm feeling really good right now. And you know, for more than a year now, I have not measured a single step of running. I don't wear a watch. I don't use an app. I don't wear a heart rate monitor. I don't listen to podcasts. I listen to two things. I listen to my body and I listen to nature. You know, I check in on the cows that I pass on my running in the mountains, you know, here in the Pyrenees. And, you know, the thing is, what's amazing about it is that, you know, I think people would be a little mistaken to think that I'm not competitive or that I can't organize, like, you know, a fairly decent training program running without technology. You know, if speed work is a part of running a good marathon, okay, so I see a tree off in the distance and I'm like, I'm going to run hard to that tree. Like, how does my body know or care about, like, whether I'm looking at a watch while I do that or not? I
Mm.
decided not to wear a watch. And, you know, or I just go for a long run. And, you know, this is kind of more in the style of Kilian Jornet, the endurance athlete I referenced earlier, who's raised around here. It's just go out and start running and enjoy it. And don't stop until you run a stop. And I mean, there are little hints of how long you're running because we have like a lot of church bells that happen here. So you kind of have, you know, when
Right.
the hour up and things like that. But it's like, it's just so refreshing not to be hostage, you know, to all those things. And if I want to listen to a podcast, I'll do it when I'm not running. You know, it's like, I like listening to podcasts. I don't need to like be more efficient with it. Like, I can find another time sitting on my sofa, looking out in the mountains and enjoy really good conversations with people. And yeah,
The
I
very
think,
important. I'm just curious as to
please.
what the benefit of that is, either at the time or after, because it sounds much more mindful, that you're far more aware. You mentioned at one point you're aware of what your body is doing or saying to you.
Yeah.
Rather than, as you said, if your attention was on the seconds clicking away, or the heartbeat numbers, or whatever else metric you're looking at. What do you feel is the difference in that focus?
Well, I mean, I should say, I mean, I'm not trying to win any Olympic medals
Sure,
in
sure,
any
sure.
sport of my life. I'm just trying to be healthy and enjoy and be in a good place. But what I think that happens in this, and I should say that even my running is still combined with a sitting mindfulness practice. I do a meditation each morning before I run. I do some sun salutations, like a little bit of a yoga routine that kind of gets my body, you know, a little bit more primed, you know, for when I run. I journal, I write, do a little bit of creative work, and I run. And this what I get out, to your question, what I get out of all of this is that in a more extreme way, I just push away other people's voices intruding me via my phone or via TV or via email, or there's a time for that. And I don't really feel like you'll never know until you start experimenting with this. And I'm certainly not advocating for people to just go from doing what they're doing now to doing an hour or 2.5 hours of pushing back. But this is why I think what I've learned through all of this is that 5 minutes can make a really big difference if you're willing to, do 5 minutes every day. And if you see the benefits of 5 minutes a day, of the first 5 minutes of a day, of just tuning into your own voice, because that's really the big benefit of what your question is just you get better at listening to your own voice first, is that if that goes well for you after a few weeks or 5 minutes, you'll probably want to make it 10 and you'll figure that out. And even I just want to, last thing, going back to my Oklahoma City days when my evenings were a disaster, and I was like, okay, if these first 5, what it really did is that instead of just waking up earlier and earlier and like doing more and being productive, what really 5 good minutes in the morning did for me was it really got me started thinking about, what am I willing to change about maybe the last 5 minutes before I go to bed?
Right. Okay.
So then, and this is a really big part of it, because I know we're heading into this new year and people are like, I'm going to wake up an hour earlier and I'm going to do this and that. And I'm like, why not start with 5 minutes in the morning? And we'll start to take a look at then, before adding more time, how you're putting yourself down at night, because that was what was killing me. When I started to put boundaries around what was happening in my evening time and set up more of a routine, and realizing that, these were in the days that Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert were on Comedy Central. I loved watching those guys at night.
Of course.
Just as that was kind of my, just way to let go a little bit and have my own time. And I'm like, oh, you can watch them on YouTube the next day if it's that important. And, it turns out really the monologue was the best part, and you can still see that, just watch that. And so what's the difference between having watched it at 11:30 at night or watching it at 10 the next morning? Nothing has really changed, By the way, I still watch some of those monologues, when I finish when I finally sit down and have breakfast. One of my ways I kind of keep up with what's happening in the United States is I'll watch a couple of those monologues, and that's all the news and TV I watch for the day.
It's a very interesting point, and it's something I'm touching on, and it's something I'm actually investigating myself, is injecting humor into more business situations. But there's a little parallel there, that it happens to be humor, so that not only are you taking a break to watch a monologue. Now, sometimes the monologues are very serious, like John Oliver and, as you say, Stephen Colbert still do. Usually they're quite serious topics, but you feel you're learning and gaining insights in a very humorous, playful way. I'm just interested in that, because what you're talking about is also you're changing the mood and the resonance. So if you're working on something that's very serious or have goals and you're changing it to humor, to playfulness, it's that energy change, that mood change that I think can be a very positive thing. It can last. When you go back to work, you're maybe a little bit lighter in touch of what you're doing and how you're interacting.
I think that I like the way that you said that. I think we all, are kind of left to figure out, what we want to take away from taking in the news that way, or not the news, but just however we choose to be informed, about it, and what the value of that is. I mean, that's really the bigger question for me, is that I think in the States that you can often be made to feel very, very guilty for not, being informed. And it's like, oh, so that means I'm supposed to watch the news, to be informed. Again, you'll never know unless you experiment with this, and stop watching the news and, and see what it is that you really missed. All the, let me just say, the news is so good. They are so good at making you feel like you're doing something wrong if you're not watching them.
Right.
And like that is what, has, and now if you watch The Social Dilemma, it's the same thing with the, with the social networks at well, they're very advanced on doing this. And again, I think we want to be a little bit thoughtful about where we are giving our attention to, because if we're not thinking about where we're giving our attention to, whether it's a few minutes of a monologue or whether it's, watching this, election recounts, for a month after 5 weeks, 6 weeks after a U.S. presidential election, it's, your awareness is going to be exploited against your will. And
it's such a good point. A colleague of mine said to me, how are you spending your attention?
Yeah.
As if it's a finite, like money that, you can make more. Okay, you can make more money, but it's like a resource that you're choosing where to put it,
Yeah.
And then suddenly when you think of it like that, suddenly you're like, oh, I'm not giving you any more. But so many interesting points there, Joe. You're dead right. It's when you cut out a lot of news, particularly people who have prone to anxiety or depression. One of the first things a lot of professionals do, and I do it in the coaching practices, is instigate that low news diet. So you're much more controlled. You're having the agency. I'm going to look at this app for X amount of time. I'm going to read these, headlines or whatever, and then read just a couple of articles. And that means you can know what's pretty much going on. But it goes along with YouTube videos as well. There's a lot of research showing that it tricks people into thinking they learn something or have some depth of knowledge, but they actually don't. The recall from YouTube videos is very poor. I mean, I love YouTube videos and learning stuff and being exposed to new information and insights the whole time, but it's a bit like the news thing. You think it's important and you probably think you're learning something. In actual fact, it's very, very thin.
Yes. We'll start to kind of wind down on this. Our mutual friend Alistair introduced me to Tara Nolan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tara. She's in Ireland and she's an executive coach focusing on teams. Sure. And I've had a couple of just delightful conversations with her. And the context of our conversation about teams has been, on my side, paddling in a doubles canoe in the Olympics and this team boat. But ultimately, Tara was very fascinated about the river as a metaphor. The river as a metaphor for how we're kind of navigating change and uncertainty. And Tara, this conversation really got me thinking, not just about, it's very cliche to talk about navigating change, and this is important, and of course it is. But what I expanded on is, what is causing the river flow? Like, what is really the source of the amount of water surging up, surging down? And really it is, we spend so much time, and I spend a lot of time as a coach on what we call controlling the controllables. Yes. But really what's happening is that we're trying to control the controllables within this disposition of, and with this alignment of the uncontrollables. And that is the river flow. And that is COVID. That is social injustice, inequality. That is climate change. That are these big things that we are not going to just change overnight or one person, but there's a real coexistence with these uncontrollables. And I think I'm going to focus a lot of my writing in Sunday Morning Joe, my weekly blog post for the next 6 months around this metaphor of the river. And, but I think that is really the essence of, as we try to pursue joy and growth and evolution and happiness, that we are doing it in this like river of uncertainty. But instead of just leaving it at uncertainty, we should pay attention. It's not about choosing which news source is right or, what the issues are or how we agree. But if you're in sales and, if you're just wondering about the stuff that affects people, I mean, this is the source of the river. I mean, it is things like climate change. It's just, it affects whether water goes up or down. I have said time and time again, the river is my best life coach. The things I have learned from the river, the way water flows, downstream through rocks and the hundreds of, or over 100 concepts, experiences, stories. And then this doubles canoe has been like, I told Tara, it's like the ultimate relationship therapist. And, but it is, I'm thinking a lot more about the water, and I think I'm going to really angle a lot more of my Sunday morning writing again towards, being a little bit more forthcoming about not taking position on these issues, but it is, if we want to kind of pursue happiness or choose happiness or growth or whatever it is that we want to do, is that, we are making this choice within the context of not avoiding the uncontrollables, but acknowledging something about them. And I think that has a lot to do. I think at the end of the day, in this life that we get, is that, we can curl up in a ball with our life jackets and we'll float through the rapids, and more than likely we'll come out fine on the other side. I just think there's maybe a more interesting way to live than just curling up in a ball and waiting to get to the calm water on the other side of the rapid. Like, why not learn how to paddle? Why not learn how the water is moving, how the water is communicating with you, how it's changing, what it's like paddling around the bend in a river when you can't see ahead. What's being, when rivers split apart into two channels or two channels come together into one. It's messy, it's different, it's changing. And, these are these lessons that you take from, for me, it's been more than 40 years of paddling rivers. And I'd like to do something a little bit more with that. I think I'm going to explore that more in my weekly writing.
It is a very powerful metaphor. And oddly, with these metaphors, the more you look into it, it seems to fit. It continues to fit. It doesn't sort of lose any of its power. But I mean, just to loop back to an earlier thing, it's again the difference when you're learning and honing in both the calm water and the rapids. In the calm water, it's learning more about yourself and your relationship to that environment in the calm times that you can bring into the chaos, and to be able to adapt better.
Yeah. And for me, I think the more, what I have found is the more that I can move my equivalent of flat water training to earlier in the day, earlier in the morning, and really control that before the river starts controlling me, then
it's a great metaphor.
Yeah. Well, if things really start to kind of go off the rails, that and typically when things go off the rails for a lot of people, it's usually fatigue. Things usually don't go off the rails at 7:30 in the morning. It's usually more like 4:00 in the afternoon. But if you have a routine that is even just 5 minutes in the morning when you first wake up, and by the way, I like 5 minutes because even if you had a 6:30 a.m. flight out of the airport in Dublin tomorrow and you have to get up at 4, like what's the difference between getting up at 4 and getting up at 3:55 and doing your
zero?
Nothing, right? And so you have this moment to, that you can control and you can invest in yourself. And when you have those days where they go off the rails, you're never more than 24 hours away from going back to the start line again. And that's, I reference the start line a lot. The name of my e-course is actually called The Start Line. And my view out my balcony looks at the Olympic start line, not the finish line. I think finish line really get us focused on goals and results. We don't yet have start lines. And I can tell you just my own experience, sitting in the start line of the Olympic Games is the most precious space of time that I've ever existed in on this planet, because you are so present in yourself. There is no motivation. There is nothing that imagining a gold medal around your neck, that's not going to help you in the start line of the Olympic Games. All you have is what you have in that moment. It's like you're naked with what you have, only what you have to get down the river. And we'll see what happens when you cross the finish line. But the more present you are with the skills you have, with the experiences that you have, with the context that you have, And the less that you think about what color medal you want to win or how much money you want to make or how many widgets you want to sell, the better chance you'll have at doing better at all of those things if you can be more present in the moment.
It's, as he says, the wrong sort of visualization. Visualization, as I understand it, is most useful when you're thinking of process.
Yeah.
Rather than outcome.
Yeah. I just, this idea of, I mean, I don't want to, I don't have much to say about, you know, there's a lot of like famous speakers and gurus that make a lot of money, you know, preaching something very different. I understand why it's really nice to think about grand outcomes and big ideas, and there's a place for them. I mean, I work with athletes that want to win Olympic gold medals. Very few people get an opportunity. Very few people do that, let alone get the opportunity to do that. And, you know, it is, I think the best people I know with goals, because I'm not like the biggest fan of goals, they set them, but they're really good at letting go of them. And then they just get back to work. It's like, you're not going to forget what you're trying. These Spanish athletes that I just watched coming down the course, they're not going to forget why they're doing this and what's most important to them. But if they just think about the gold medal, the Tokyo gold medal they don't yet have, that's just energy being sucked away from something that could have made their practice better today.
And the goal is way too far away. If the goal is to, you know, whatever you're working on in that practice run, that's all you need to focus on. It's like, I'm just going to move better, or I'm going to do this better, or this thing better, you know, one or two.
The more present we can be. And I think once we start to think about how many devices there are in the world that are trying to take us away from being present, not the least of which is the news. You know, they present fear about the future, which makes you think about the future. Or our own brains kind of dwelling on things that we did in the past. You know, it's, you know, you can go on for a long time about these.
No, but you're dead right. That's exactly. Depression is, as I said, dwelling on the past. Anxiety is fear and dwelling in future tense.
Yeah.
And neither are you properly present in the present tense. Yeah. It's a key thing.
All right.
Good. Well, thank you so much. Great to have you on the show, Joe Jacob.
I enjoyed this so much, and if we ever get the opportunity to do a round 2, I would love that, and I look forward to some virtual coffees offline with you as well.
Absolutely.
And, yeah, I know we just kind of jumped right into this today, like, hey, let's start recording, but this was wonderful, and I'm so grateful that Alistair introduced us to each other.
Excellent. Thank you so much.